Camille. It's very nice to see people in real life instead of on Zoom. So, as Camille said, I am at the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities called CARD. And we call it UCF CARD, and a lot of times we get calls from the students saying, "Where's my ID card? Where's my ID card?" So it's a little bit confusing for our students, but the center has been around, our center has been around since 1998. We started with 247 families who had children with autism, children and adults, and we now are at 24,000 families. And so we serve 7 counties, so it's not just Orlando, but the population has grown, the needs have grown, the children have grown up, and we have a lot of the same challenges that families of children and adults with Down syndrome have. You know, where's my son or daughter going to go during the daytime when they're out of school? What am I going to do about health care? All of these kinds of things. Where's my child going to live when I'm gone? So there are a lot of things that we overlap with. And so tonight I'm going to talk to you about autism and Down syndrome together, and then a lot more about autism itself, because sometimes people think, oh, well, my child's doing this just because they're being uncooperative, or they're just like, rigid, they're just not being flexible, and maybe they do actually have a dual diagnosis. So, Robin, are you controlling the slide deck? Okay. There you go. Okay, so this is the incidence rates now. We just got new statistics from CDC. 1 in 31 children under the age of 8 are being diagnosed with autism today. And compared to Down syndrome, it's 1 in 700. So you guys have fewer people around, but needs are still there. So go to the next slide, because I overlapped them. So I did statistics, and then I double-checked it with GPT chat and AI to make sure I did the math right, because I was like, okay, if there's 1 in 700, and we know that 16 to 18% of people with Down syndrome also have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, what's the overall incidence rate? And it came out to about 1 in 4,650 children would have both Down syndrome and autism at the same time. So it's a very small population, but one that's very important, because they're going to have double the challenges. We got double the blessings and double the challenges. So let's go on to the next one. The kinds of things that we find that overlap, or things that are maybe different that are in the Down syndrome population, but more so in the population that has Down syndrome and autism. As you probably know, autism is about 4 times more common in boys than in girls. So the population of children with autism and Down syndrome is overwhelmingly male, a lot of boys. So that's very different than, I think, the general Down syndrome population. And then there are these constellations of behavioral and gastrointestinal kinds of challenges that seem to be exacerbated in people who have both Down syndrome and autism. So constipation, which is I think a fairly common problem in Down syndrome, right? Worse when you have Down syndrome and autism, so statistically more complicated. Also reflux, and also food sensitivities, not the allergy kind, but the gagging kind, the sensory sensitivities to swallowing different kinds of food, eating food that's mixed texture, not just smooth, not just chunky with smooth, and like something like yogurt with fruit, a lot of times would be very difficult. And so scoliosis, which I didn't know, I just learned that today, that scoliosis is more common in children with autism who also have Down syndrome. We don't have a lot of scoliosis in the ASD population to begin with. And then that the children who have Down syndrome and autism overall have less significant heart defects than children in the Down syndrome population in general. So those are some things that are like, a little tweak on what we would normally see in Down syndrome, what we normally see in autism. But as you know, every child is different, and just because one child has constipation doesn't mean that every child in this cluster is going to have constipation. Thank God. So, a couple of the things that I think that families who have children with Down syndrome or adults with Down syndrome, you have certain things that are more known than what parents of children with autism have. You have a cause, right? You have a cause for autism, for Down syndrome that can be identified, whereas the cause of autism is still, after 40 years of research, still being investigated. And you probably heard the Department of Health is going to discover the cause of autism by September, so that will be interesting. But a lot of research has gone into the cause, and there's still a lot of concern about what is causing the rise in the number of cases of autism. And you all have specific medical tests, like hard science medical tests. You do a genetic test, you find extra chromosome, you have Down syndrome. With autism, it's not a medical test in the sense of a blood test or something concrete. It's clinical judgment. It's evaluating symptoms that you see or that the parent reports to you or that the teacher reports to you. So it's not as definitive, and a lot of times people will question, does he really have autism? Does she really have autism? How do I know it's autism? Maybe they're just stubborn. And a lot of people will say, well, his dad, his uncle, his brother, they all talk late, so it's not a big deal. So that can be challenging for families to not have a definitive answer about what is going on here. You have the advantage of knowing very early in the child's life, and sometimes prenatally, this child does have Down syndrome. I can get on board with early intervention. I can get on board with the kind of care and setting up a system of care to deal with all of the challenges, the medical challenges, the behavioral, the speech, the OT and PT is needed, and you have that knowledge fairly early. The average age of diagnosis of autism is still between 3 and 4 years old. Even though if you really knew what you were looking for, you could identify it as early as 12 months. So for a lot of parents, they have that grief of, oh, I should have known, I should have been more forceful in telling my pediatrician something's going on with my child, and I lost time that I'll never get back for early intervention because my child was not even identified properly until they were 3 years old. And then for individuals who have Down syndrome and autism, those are identified even later, because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, the child has Down syndrome, that's why they're not doing this, that's why they're not doing that. But they don't consider there might be something else going on until they've had more, maybe meeting with other families and meeting other children with Down syndrome and saying, wait a minute, my child's not, like you said, vanilla, flavored Down syndrome. So you do have that. And then you have medical impacts, more so than what the autism population has. The heart, there are different kinds of medical challenges that are more common in Down syndrome. And in autism, it's more psychological. It's more neurology kind of based things. So you see the kinds of challenges they have are in tolerating sounds, in tolerating textures, in tolerating other people's smells, and things like that. So you'll have a lot of times young children with autism, sometimes even adolescents will, just be what people would say very rude about things because they can't tolerate your voice. They can't tolerate the way you sip your drink. You're making too much noise. So you have those kind of medical impacts where we really, in autism, don't see so many of those. You do see some kids who do suffer with gastrointestinal kind of sensitivities to different kinds of substances, but not so much the heart or other valves or anything like that that's more common in Down syndrome. And then, Down syndrome is associated with certain kinds of physical profile. And that's, I think, what you were alluding to, that people see people with Down syndrome, and they're like, well, you don't have autism, because they can see the physical characteristics that are often associated with Down syndrome. Whereas autism, you don't get to see it on the outside until maybe you start talking to somebody or until you get to know them better or hearing the stories their parents tell. So when that child's falling down in the hall of Publix there, pitching a big fit, everybody's thinking, well, what's wrong with that parent? Why can't they control that child? Whereas if a child with Down syndrome is crying, they're going to say, oh, the child has a disability. So a lot of times the autism community feels that they are judged more, that they are having to conform to what other people think average is, whereas people who have physical disabilities or other kinds of disabilities that are obvious to people are given a little bit of a break rather than being held to the, this is how everybody has to be standard. So those are just, again, some of the differences that we see. So let's go to the next one. So a couple things that are kind of red flags in a child with Down syndrome if you start to see these kinds of things developing. I don't know how many, do any of you have really young children still? You do? Okay. So a child with autism will frequently have a language regression. They'll start saying some words, and then those words will sort of fade away. And that is common in about 40% of children with autism. Now, we don't have a lot of data on the early development of children with Down syndrome who also have autism that say they have that language regression, because a lot of times their language is just kind of moving at a little bit slower pace to begin with, so they don't get words and then lose them. They just start developing the words later. So that is one red flag that would be something as a source of concern. And the stereotype would say that people with Down syndrome are friendly, they want to be social, they make a lot of facial expressions, they're very emotive, they have a good sense of humor, all of those kinds of things. In children with autism, those are things that almost always have to be directly taught and don't come naturally. So if they are just even smiling and making eye contact, and if you don't see your child with Down syndrome smiling at other people and wanting to initiate to them and making eye contact and bringing them a flower or a weed or something they found on the ground and saying, here, look at this. That's kind of a thing that we see a lot in autism. They don't do that naturally. And they don't also gesture in the same way that other kids learn gestures, where other kids will learn, Mommy stands like this when she's mad, or don't do that, or things like that. They don't really pick up on those gestures. They don't tend to imitate what they see other children doing so much, whereas children with Down syndrome will want to be with other kids, will want to imitate, will want to be in the action. Children with autism, they will like to be in the action, but only if it's running around, super hyperactive, running and jumping and doing all sorts of things like that. Another thing that's a very early sign for autism is what they call a lack of a proto-declarative point. So a proto-declarative point is not showing you something by touching it, but like I'm pointing at that sign and I'm saying, and then I'm looking at you to say, did you see the sign? I'm not saying that. I'm like, and I'm trying to get your attention so that we can look at things at the same time. Children with autism do touch point to things that they want, and they'll also take your hand and put your hand on something and try to use your hand as a tool to get you to do something for them by taking your hand and moving it. So those are a little bit different than what we would typically see with a child with Down syndrome. Oftentimes they will pull the parent to where they want something, and then they'll just stand there and wait because you're supposed to read their mind. Because in their mind, you know exactly what they're thinking. You're hungry and you want Fruit Loops, and they're up there in that cabinet. And so when you don't get them out right away, they start crying, like, why don't you get my Fruit Loops? So a lot of times parents, initially when they get like that, they just start taking everything out of the cabinet and trying to offer it to the child instead of encouraging that child to really try to differentiate their communication. So they do a lot of that pull, use it somewhere, and then stand there like you're supposed to know what it is that they want. Echolalia, that's kind of repeating back what somebody just said to you. That's pretty typical in toddlers, and I think in children with Down syndrome too. Do you want juice? Juice, like that. But for a child to have what's called delayed echolalia, where they hear something on TV and then like 20 hours later they're repeating words they heard on TV or scripts from Disney movies, word for word. It's a great memory feature that many children with autism have. They have like memories like a steel trap, but they get caught up in these verbal loops in their head and are talking in a non-contextual way. And sometimes it's contextual. I remember when we were doing communion class one time for a group of kids, And we were trying to teach the kids, you go, this is in the Catholic Church, and go in there and, stand up, sit down, the whole thing. And one of the times, this boy did not sit down, and I said, Daniel, sit down. And he goes, keep your pants on, really loud. So, that was a contextual delayed echolalia.
That works.
So, we also have a tendency to have interest in stuff. They're interested in things more than people. They're focused on objects rather than interactions. So that's pretty common in young children with autism. They tend to learn a lot of nouns first, whereas children with other kind of language disorders, they learn mommy, daddy, sister, doggy, people active things versus truck, Toyota. A lot of times the first words for kids on the spectrum are unique to their specific interests. So dinosaur names, which you wouldn't expect to come in before book and bottle and things like that. And they're saying these pterodactyl and things like that. And then pretend play. You don't see a lot of pretend play early in development, and that's one of the things that differentiates autism from other developmental disabilities. Up until the age of 18 months, the kids are all kind of equally in all three groups in developmental disabilities and in autism and Down syndrome. They all have similar play profiles. But after 18 months, we start to see the other children are developing pretend play. They're taking the doll and putting it in the truck or the bed. They're putting fake food in the pots on the pretend stove, and they're pretending to. And the kids with autism are just turning the cars upside down and spinning the wheels. So there's less of that pretend play that develops naturally. Now you can learn, all kids with autism can learn these skills, but they need a lot of instruction to learn them. And then the other thing that we see a lot is what people refer to as autistic meltdowns. And these are believed to be different than simple tantrums where I have a means to an end and I'm going to scream and kick, and then if you give me what I want, I stop immediately. With kids on the spectrum, it's almost like they go over the edge and they can't recover well from those kinds of tantrums. And a lot of people think that their neurology is just completely overwhelmed and can't deal. It's almost like everything's firing at once, and so they either have an implosion where they put their head down and won't communicate, or sometimes they have an explosion. So those are some of the things that would be if you've got Down syndrome and 3 or 4 of these things, maybe go for a really good diagnostic differential evaluation. Okay, Robin, let's go. Okay, now this is a video. We don't need to hear the sound, but this is 3 children. The first child is a child who's developing typically. The second one is a child with Down syndrome. And the third one's a child with autism. And you can kind of see how they're connecting up with the evaluator in a different way. So just go ahead and play it if you can. So she's making the Oscar can go. And see that connection there. Here's a child with Down syndrome. And he looks back to that moment of joint attention. And here's the child who has autism. I don't have a child with both, so sorry about that. He's not connecting up. He's interested in the toy, but he's not connecting up. And a lot of times you'll see children with autism that want to communicate when they have a need, but when you want to communicate with them, they're not so interested. Okay, you can go to the next one. I think I have to click again. Click again. There you go.
Okay.
Oh, that's way too small. All right, well, this is just a graphic, and I'll send the slides to Camille so she can share them with you. And this came out of one of the websites that's about Down syndrome and autism. There are 3 or 4 websites that are specifically dedicated to Down syndrome and autism combined. And this was from one of them. And it's basically kind of looking at, I think I said a lot of the things that are in that central column there. But, there is this overlap that you see in both, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have ASD in addition to Down syndrome, but it's something worth considering, evaluating in that case. And why would you want to do that? You've already got a child who has Down syndrome, right? Well, because there are some things that are available to children with autism that are not as available to children with Down syndrome. Children with autism are covered under this Medicaid autism intervention bill that was passed. So they're able to access therapies if their parents are employed by either the state of Florida or agency of the state of Florida, or they have Medicaid, they're eligible for a lot of early intervention. Whereas with Down syndrome, you might have to fight more with your insurance company to get that. So something we're thinking about there. All right, go ahead since that's super tiny. Okay, so here's an example of some of the neurological differences. So on the side that says NT, that's the neurotypical brain. That's how most of our brains work when we're perceiving information. And this is kind of a dual information with visual and with auditory that's being processed by the brains. And you can see how it's kind of like if you were to take it and roll it into like a Play-Doh, you'd have an equal amount of blue and an equal amount of pink in the neurotypical brain, the so-called average brain. And you see how it's clustered nice and tight in the auditory cortex and in the visual, going back to the occipital lobe where the visual cortex is. On the other side, that's the brain of Temple Grandin when she's processing the same information. And for many children and adults on the spectrum, they have a high visual acuity, high tendency to look at things from a visual standpoint and not take advantage of the auditory input. And so her brain is visually, processing all these things. And then the teeny tiny part is the auditory. So if you want to make an impact on a child who has autism, you could use that visual channel. And visual is something I think that supports a lot of children with special needs. So creating visual reminder, creating a picture strip of what they're supposed to do when they get ready for bed or when they get ready for school can help them to become more independent. So we use that a lot in autism to try to help them to understand expectations, understand what they're supposed to be doing next, and to build predictability for them. And that decreases the anxiety. And I think anxiety is something that's in both conditions. So just a little, that's a little like PET scan basically, but let's go to the next one. Here's the big old brain. So these are all the parts that are involved in day-to-day life. So the frontal lobe, that's your higher level thinking. The amygdala, that's this tiny little pea thing in the middle of your brain that is associated with emotional perception and registration of emotions and knowing yourself what you're feeling. Not just being able to recognize it, but saying, I feel sad, I'm angry. So that area is in the center of the brain, and around it is the hippocampus. It kind of is like a comma or something like that. Hippocampus is for memory. And what we find with the amygdala in brain autopsies and also in other kinds of scans, electrical scans, is that the amygdala is smaller in people who have autism, which may be correlated with the fact they have a hard time perceiving and understanding emotions and recognizing emotions in themselves and others. The hippocampus is also different in the way the cells are arranged, and we know that a lot of times people with autism have really good memories for facts and figures and pictures and things like that. And then the cerebellum, which is involved in movement and motor planning, that is also got different cellular structure in autism. The cells in there are kind of more compact and larger cells in that area, and that may be associated with balance, seeking out sensations, seeking out rocking and things like that, that may help people with autism to kind of stay in a state of feeling calm and homeostasis and all of those kinds of things because they're getting the input that they need because the brain is different in that area. And then the frontal lobe is really about higher level thinking, planning, and all that. I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a minute. But the other thing that's different about brains of people with autism, you guys have all heard of pruning, like how your neurons are pruned into these super highways of information that go quickly through the brain, and that's why we can think so quickly and react so quickly when we touch the hot stove and everything. It works great in the average brain, but in the brain of children with autism, that kind of differentiation does not happen. They tend to have fewer large neural pathways and many, many more tiny branches, almost like the difference between a tree and a bush. So that can make it harder for people with autism to process information, to make associations, and to quickly respond when they're told to do something. And a lot of times people think, oh, well, they're just being stubborn, or they're just not listening. It could be they're actually not even processing it in the same way yet. So you oftentimes will want to give them a warning. We're going to leave in 5 minutes. It's time for you to start getting ready to leave, or you have 5 more minutes of computer time, and then it's all over. Because sometimes if you try to move them right away without that kind of preparing them and warning them, you get a kind of a pushback or a meltdown situation. All right, so let's go to the next one. So this is the criteria for autism in 2025. So we've gone through a lot of iterations of autism over the years since it was first identified, and actually the first recorded use of the word of autism was in 1911. But then in the 40s and 50s, we had a whole bunch of theories about autism that were posited in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And as we got smarter, we started making these classifications. And at first it was just called infantile autism. And then 10 years after that, they decided that wasn't good because there were people who didn't look exactly like that. So they made all these subcategories. And that's where they got the PDD-NOS. I don't know if you remember the pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. That was like a dumping ground if you had some autistic traits, but not enough for the full diagnosis. And then the next time they redid the manual, they said, oh, there's this thing called Asperger's syndrome. They have it over in Europe. Let's have that in ours. And that was for people who had normal language development and average IQ, but still had a lot of trouble socially and a lot of trouble in terms of understanding perspective and things like that. And then in 2013, they said, well, there's nothing scientific to say that Asperger's is any different than autism, is any different than PDD-NOS. It's all clinical judgment because we don't have any real tests. It's all based on your expertise as a doctor evaluating this person, the time of day you see them, what they ate, that morning, who knows. So they went back to saying, we're just going to call it autism spectrum disorder, which in a way is bad because it's almost like saying, I don't like neurotypical either because it doesn't tell me what I can do to help that person. So they decided to lump on this new thing called levels, the levels of autism. So now we have level 1, level 2, level 3 autism spectrum disorder. And level 1 is requiring support. Level 2 is requiring substantial support. Well, I have it in the slides, I'll show you. But it's just kind of based on the level of support that is needed to allow that person to be successful. So these are the basic categories. Let's go to the next one. I think we have a Venn diagram. Yeah. So there are 3 things that have to be present in the area of social communication. And then there are 4 options in this area that they call restrictive and repetitive interests. And you have to have at least 2 of those. So 5 or more overall of these symptoms that are on this list, and in the right pattern. So go ahead to the next one. So these are what we're looking for in terms of social relatedness. It's reciprocity. It's if I look at a cake and peekaboo to you, do you do it back to me, or do you just sit there and laugh? And a lot of times children with autism like it, but they don't initiate it back to you. It's lack of connecting up nonverbal things like gestures and facial expressions and nodding and things like that with social communication. And then a hard time developing relationships appropriate to the child's age. So you might have a 5-year-old who wants to play with a 2-year-old, or an 11-year-old who wants to play with a 5-year-old, or 11-year-old who wants to talk to a 28-year-old all the time. So it's a little bit hard for them to maintain relationships with people in their own age range. And we think that that's because people accommodate them more. Like older people, when they're talking to a younger person with autism, they accommodate. They keep the conversation going. They talk about what that person's interested in. Whereas a kid that age will be like, I'm done talking about toilets. Why are you so interested in toilets? And a younger child, they're just happy to have a friend who's older. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for with friendships. And sometimes they're not interested in even having friends. So that's also very concerning, I think, to their parents. So, and let's look at the other one. So these are the things that most people think of when they think of autism. They think of the stereotype behaviors, the rocking, flapping, the echolalia. It's really not unique to autism. There are other disabilities where these things happen. But it's when you have these things with the social problems, that's when you have an autism profile. So it's like adherence to rituals, like if you love McDonald's, and mom says we're going to McDonald's, and you think we're going to the McDonald's over there on Colonial, and suddenly she takes a left and she goes to a different McDonald's, you're going to have a big fit about that because it's violating your rule, even though you love McDonald's. They're going to have a 100-day party at school, and there's going to be a special guest, and it's going to be ice cream. Even though you love ice cream, that's like, no. Now we're supposed to be at PE. Now we're supposed to be doing this. So you get really rigid about things. Unusual interests or interests that are not appropriate for age is another characteristic. And then unusual responses to sensory input. Some kids with autism, they need a lot of stimulation to get to a point where they're happy. Other kids they want to cut it all out. They want to hide. They want to squeeze themselves into a dark corner. They want to have their ears covered all the time. So it seems like their sensory thresholds are just different than a lot of other people. And it could be either way. It could be either way in the same child in different kinds of circumstances too. So that's something that a lot of parents will report to us. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So there's your levels. Basically, it's kind of, again, a little bunch of buckets that they made, and, it's, again, who decides how much? If you talk to the parents, they're going to all say, oh, my kid requires very substantial supports, even though he has a job at Publix. I have to tell him to get up and put deodorant on every day, and he requires that, consider that substantial support for a 28-year-old, So, again, it's clinical judgment that's being used to make those kind of determinations. So that is your diagnosis in a nutshell. So let's look at what's next. So how does the frontal lobe thing, has that impact kids with autism? It's all about figuring out attention, planning, organization, all of those kinds of skills are really, really difficult for kids on the spectrum. So we do a lot of supplemental supports for them in school, and a lot of those will be appropriate for kids with Down syndrome as well. So things like visual supports, putting up barriers so you're not distracted by things around you, having a set routine for doing homework, having a place for everything and labels for where things go. I've seen we've done visual supports for families where we labeled every drawer in the child's dresser with what goes where and so on. You can also find that they will work for the access to sensory stimulation. So you jump on a trampoline, you want to jump on a trampoline. Sometimes people talk about a sensory diet that can help. So by giving kids access to a certain kind of stimulation every so often, it helps them to stay focused. So they may get a child up and run up and down the hallway, or have them jump 20 times on a trampoline, or take a swim or something like that, where they're putting them through certain kind of stimulation that will help them to then settle down and be able to focus on something or stick with something for a period of time. And then perspective taking. This is a hard one for them because they don't really have a perception that other people see things from a different vantage than they do. They tend to make assumptions about what you know. They may come and start talking to you about something and you have no idea what they're talking about. I was just with somebody yesterday, and we were sitting together, and I asked her two questions about, I asked her some questions about a trip she took, and she suddenly started talking about Elvis Presley. And I was like, whoa, there you go. So that kind of a thing, not picking up that, I'm like, what's going on? Not seeing other people's reaction to what you're saying and adjusting what you would do. Like, if I'm like this, somebody else would say, oh, she doesn't understand, I have to say it a different way. But for a person with autism, they just keep talking to you. So they also don't do good turn taking. Like, a lot of times it's, I'm going to tell you everything that I know about dinosaurs, and then we're done. Right? And I don't even bother saying goodbye. So that can be difficult for making friends. They also will be very honest. They don't see why people should lie about stuff. So they'll say things like, well, you're awful fat today. Or you have a giant zit on your nose. That always is a good way to impress a girl in school, right? But yeah, they're just very challenged in that area and need a lot of support and perspective taking training to understand, oh, maybe I see it a different way than somebody else. So we work a lot on those kinds of things with the kids. And they're very concrete and literal. If you say knock it off, they'll knock it off. If you say shake a leg, they're like, okay. I had one girl came into our office, this was a while ago, she's grown up now, but she came in and she had a horrible semester at her high school. And it was January, so I said, okay, well, it's all over now. You're on a clean slate. She said, there's no slate in here. What are you talking about? So it can get very contentious with people, and they can offend people very easily. And the other thing is this idea of central coherence, being able to see the forest for the trees, not getting caught up in details of things, being able to shift gears and move from one thing to another thing without getting all discombobulated. So those are really difficult things for people with autism. So, all right, so let's go to the next one. So this kind of shows you how those three categories there go into these problems. So one more slide. And these are the behavioral indicators of these executive functioning problems. Now, I think there are probably a lot of kids who today have executive functioning problems because everything's kind of fed to them in very fast-paced video games and movies and things like that. Everything's very fast. But these are signs that you have a weak executive functioning system. If you're turning things in late, if you're getting caught up in details, if you have 20 minutes to work on something and you get so stuck on being perfectionist on the first thing that you don't finish. Those are the kinds of challenges that we see with executive functioning. And then let's look at the other one. Central coherence. So see here you have a picture of a man who is having a nice night out by the fire. He's camping. And so click one time. Click it. Yeah. So see, if you only see part of the picture, then you're missing out a lot of important information. But we have kids who will focus in on one thing. I see Dr. Seuss is in that book. Or, there's an error on page 32. There's a typo on page 32. There's something wrong on page 32. So those are some things that, drive people insane because you're like, no, don't worry about that. You need to finish reading the passage. So those can wind up causing a lot of problems, and being so literal and concrete like that and not being willing to kind of adapt what you're doing can cause a lot of problems at work, at school, with your family, when you have to live with other people. That's why a lot of people want to live alone when they have autism.
Is that delaying comprehension, or is it that they're just looking at that one thing, or is there, because of their looking at one thing for different things, it becomes comprehension? What is it?
With the comprehension is really hard. They're good at reading what's in the words, but not making the inference. So it's that perspective taking. It's like, I see all the information that's on the page in front of me. Little Red Riding Hood, she went to this house on the edge of the forest. She met her grandmother had big teeth. They can answer all the questions like, where did Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother live? On the edge of the forest in the big city, blah, blah, blah. But if you were to ask them something like, what's a good title? Well, this is obviously a fairy tale, but what's a good title for this story? Well, if it doesn't tell me anywhere. Or you're like, what season do you think it is? Those are the kinds of questions where you have to take information that's not immediately there and synthesize it and take into perspective what other people might have thought about when they wrote that. That's hard. What is the author's intention? We always fail that question. So yeah, I think it is comprehension, but I think that has to do with being able to use context clues and not just go on the surface level of the words, right? Because the word BEAR can mean lots of different things depending on the context of the sentence it's in, right? Yeah, so that's a problem with central coherence. You get stuck on the little thing. So, okay, let's see if we look next. All right, so keep going, keep going. I don't know why these all progressive display. That's okay. And then again, the sensory issues, you'll see a lot of times that kids on the spectrum, it used to be before they had these big headphones on their head and they really stood out. Now everyone's got big headphones on their heads, they fit in. And everybody's got a fidget spinner, right? And everybody has a fidget spinner now, so it's cool to have them. But yeah, those kinds of things, a lot of times they feel, and the adults that are verbal will tell us, I have to do a lot of work to fit into your world. I have to hold things together where I want to do this, or I want to, tap, tap, tap my head, and I have to stop myself from doing that because I know people will think I'm weird if I do that. And that kind of holding things in, or masking your natural tendencies, they tend to go home and then just need to be autistic for an hour and de-chill and rant and rave about everything. And that's hard on the families too. So, okay, let's go one more. And again, lights like this and the sounds like this that you probably didn't hear until I just mentioned, the air conditioning and the buzzing of the lights and things, they might be really bothered by that. So in addition to listening to me, they're hearing this, they're hearing that, and it can be overwhelming to them. So I want to do an experiment now. So we're going to say, you guys over here, you guys at you two tables, yeah, because your table's full. These two tables, I want you guys to close your eyes. Okay, no peeking. Okay, and all right, so keep your eyes closed on left. Go ahead, Robin, I'm going to change it. I want you guys to look at this picture. Don't say anything, okay? So click. Okay, click one more time, Robin. Okay, so now, everybody who has their eyes closed, open your eyes. Okay, now you guys are gonna close your eyes, okay? All right, one more slide, Robin. Okay, one more slide. Okay, all right, everybody can open their eyes now. All right, so in your little tables, I want you to discuss what would be a good food for what you saw. What would be a good food? Okay? Okay, so what do you guys say? What do you think?
A bug.
A bug, okay. And what do you guys say?
Apples. Apples.
Apples, okay. And what do you guys say?
Fly.
Fly. Okay, so you two agree, so you obviously. So, okay, but why do you guys think why are you saying apple and they're saying bug? Because you all saw the same picture. Yeah, you did. Go backwards to the picture.
Yeah, we did.
Go back two more.
Yeah, that looks like a horse. Oh, wow.
It does look like a horse. Oh, for heaven's sake.
But it's the only thing that's different is your perspective. It's the same picture rotated.
Oh, there.
What's it rotated?
Yeah, it's rotated.
Oh my
But
Horse.
That's crazy.
he's got a mane and he's got a nose and his ears like this. It's the profile. Yeah.
It
So
is.
that's what it's like when you have autism and you can't shift your perspective. Everybody seems to know something you don't know. You don't know what they know. And they don't know that you don't know what you don't know. So it gets to be a big communication problem. And that's kind of that whole perspective-taking problem that they have. So when you are looking at something from only one perspective, one angle, and you can't see the other one, or it doesn't come natural, people have to tell you about it, that's really hard. It's stressful for you to live in that kind of environment. So, all right, let's go on. So a couple things that I think that are hard for people with autism, and I think are also tips that would work for people with Down syndrome, are to help build structure and predictability for them. If they know what's coming next, if they know how long it's going to last, they are they're better able to get through it all. You say, okay, we're going to church. Church will last an hour and a half. Then we're going to go to 2J's and have food. Then I can think, oh, okay, I have another 20 minutes to make it through so I can go to 2J's and eat the food I like. But structure helps them to feel calm. when things, for people with autism especially, a party, if you don't know what's going to happen at the party, who's going to be there, what the activities are, that's going to be, I don't want to go. I don't want to do that. Whereas if you gave them a precursor of what's going to happen, what's likely to happen. And so we create things that are called social stories. Have you guys heard of social stories? So you can use those as well. It basically gives description of what's going to happen, then it gives perspective of what people expect or what people would think. You know, if you pick your nose, nobody's going to want to hold your hand or anything like that. And then what you could do instead. And that kind of thing can really help with children making it through new situations, tolerating change, dealing with uncertainty, and so on. And then explaining the rules and what kinds of things would get them in trouble is also really important. I know it's hard to think of everything that can get you in trouble, but there's a lot out there that can get you in trouble if you don't know what to do. And really to teach and to label emotions and to say, you know, you're feeling disappointed. That's different than mad. That's a little different. You feel sad. That's different than angry. So calling to their mind and labeling for them what they are feeling will help them to be able to communicate better when they are having those feelings. All right, let's see, what else do we have? Oh yeah, so meltdown. So this is a little handout that we created. We actually created it for the college because we have, believe it or not, people with autism in IES at UCF and people with autism on campus in general, and they have meltdowns at college. They do things like they go out and throw rocks in the middle of the quad, and people say, this child is having an issue. So go ahead to the next one. This is kind of the rumbling stage. The rumbling stage is where you want to intervene before they get over into that boiling stage. So these are the signs that your child's having an increased likelihood of having a meltdown. If they're like their muscles in their neck getting very tense, you see, person muttering under my breath, stupid. That's a sign that they're going into that meltdown phase. So you want to intervene at that point. So click one more time. I think there's strategies there. So these are some of the strategies that we use when we start seeing that rumbling. One of the things that has been really helpful to kids and adults when they're in that agitated state is going low and slow. We teach the police that too, going low and slow. Don't come in like, the police are told to come in ahead, be confrontational. So get down to their level, slow down what you're saying, lower your voice, and breathe and model the behavior that you want them to do. So that way they're more likely to mirror what you're doing than if you just continue. So, well, why can't you get it together? Just stop. It's not that big a deal, because to them it's a big deal. There's also the idea of a safe person and a home base, someplace they can go where they can just be themselves and cocoon, or they can actually say things like, I feel like killing somebody. So those are just a couple of the things. Creating a humorous situation or making a mistake yourself, like, oh, I dropped everything on the floor, and making it be something where they can get into a different role and help you can also be a way to break into that kind of meltdown thing. Or just walk and don't talk. A lot of times I'm going to walk. I'm going to walk all the way around the block. We're going to walk all the way down the hall and up down the hall again. And just don't talk. Don't try to solve the problem in the middle of that kind of rumbling, because it can just escalate it worse. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah, when you have to be planning ahead. When you have a child with autism, planning is your friend. So presetting what the expectations are, providing a busy bag or busy hands bag to take with you, so that if there's waiting that has to happen, there's something you can card out that the child can do and be engaged with. If you're going to a place where you're going to drop your child off and they're going to be by themselves, identifying who's their go-to person if you have a problem, who's the person that's going to be able to understand you, building those relationships so wherever you are going to drop your son or daughter, that you know who that person is, and that they know who that person is if they have a problem. And then just kind of like, sometimes setting boundaries, setting rules. Go ahead to the next one. Communication. You probably can't read these messages, these emails. This is this guy who emails like every 2 minutes some thought that's in his head. And, you know, my email box is filled up. He's talking about his cat. And, you know, I don't know, my daughter doesn't like Italian or something. I don't know. But anyway, a lot of times with autism, they don't take other people's perspective. Like, I'm working. I can't have a chat with you on email at my email. So, you know, setting up limits and being very clear about rules and limits when you set them, and then role play. Okay, I'm gonna, you know, I'll pretend I'm working. You know, come in and then let's practice what we just talked about. If they demonstrate the skill, you always want to reinforce it whenever you see it naturally occurring, because a lot of times our tendency is to just expect it to occur and not say, oh, you did a great job there, not interrupting me, thank you for not interrupting me. And then make a visual support, make it permanent, put it in writing. If you've got an agreement, have them write and sign their name. We're agreeing here that you're not going to interrupt me more than 2 times during this TV show to tell me something. So you put that all in writing and have that as a and then you post it on the refrigerator or in the classroom, wherever you happen to have the student or the child. So, all right, so those are my tips. And then I think the rest of it is really just about CARD. So let's go to the next one. Oh yeah, visual support. So you're all familiar with the first N cards? First you do this, then you get that. So it's just grandma's rule. You eat your vegetables, you get to have your ice cream. But making it visual and having it up there as a reminder, sometimes you can just tap it and not have to say anything, and they're like, oh yeah, I gotta finish my homework. Oh yeah, I gotta put away my shoes. So it's a great way to support receptive language, support independence, and then also to ward off arguments. Because for some reason, at least with kids with autism, they're not arguing with that picture. But when you say, well, I want you to do this and first, and then we'll do that, a lot of times they're like, but I want to do this right now, 5 more minutes or something like that. So this makes it very concrete for them. All right, so now, let's see what's next. Okay, so about CARD, Camille talked about CARD at the very beginning, so I'll tell you a little bit about CARD, because we're the Center for Autism, but we're not actually a place where you bring people. We're actually, if you come to the office, like people came into the office today and they were stealthy silent, and I was there and one of the student assistants was there and everybody else was out in the field, and they must have, I don't know how long they were standing there, silently, like why didn't they say something, but yeah. So go ahead and click, so Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. This is our mission. The mission was developed by parents. And CARD, the whole funding for CARD was initiated by groups of parents throughout the state of Florida. And this was back in the early 90s when they said these teachers don't know how to do anything with our kids. And you're basically sending these kids out to segregated schools in the field or far away from everybody else. So this was the mission that they wanted to support and maximize the potential of people with autism and related disabilities. And we cover the entire lifespan from the time we say diagnosis to stenosis, basically. So the whole lifespan. Our oldest constituents are in their 70s now. The youngest ones are in their 1s. So go ahead. Yeah, I think you have to just click a bunch of them there. So we are funded by the state. Yes, out there. Great, you did good. Good job. Good job. Okay, so our model is a consultative support model, which means we're not doing direct therapy. We're not coming into your house to work with your child, to do feeding therapy with them, or to do behavior intervention with them. But if you have an issue, you have a bedtime issue, you have a sitting at the table, a sibling issue, we'll come in and we'll coach you on this is how we can deal with this kind of problem with work in the grocery store. We'll show you how you deal with that in the grocery store. We'll get a first ed card with a reinforcer, we'll work through the grocery store. But we don't come every week. So basically our model is based on people saying what they need. And a lot of times they forget, and like, we don't call people because we got 24,000 people we're dealing with and there's only 20 of us. So we all have like 1,000 people or more on our caseloads. So we can't be checking up on you. We have a newsletter, The newsletter goes out every month. It's also usually included on our website or on our Facebook page, and that's how you can kind of figure out what's going on. But you can call the center anytime that you have a need. And it could be that we don't hear from you for 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. And you're always registered. As long as you live in our area, you register with us. Our goal is also to enhance the community, to augment the community's ability to accept, understand, and support people with autism being part of the community. So that might be Boy Scout troops, soccer clubs, judo providers, and then we call them dojos, I guess they're called dojos, and dance and other things. So not only to just direct people to, oh, go to Chance of Dance, go here, go there, but if there's not a program, or if someone wants to develop a program or include children with autism or adults with autism into an existing program, we'll work with them to try to make that happen. We also are we're the repository of what's going on in research. We don't do research ourselves, but we support a lot of research studies by giving families and adults information on what research is going on and how they can participate, and then disseminating the results of that research. And then if there are gaps in the current community for people with autism, we try to work with community leaders to develop programs that fill those gaps. So some of the things we're working on are things like employment, things to do, respite, things that are all still very much needed, and working with different agencies to see, hey, how can we partner together to make things better for everybody. So let's go on to the next one. This is our map. Go on more because I think it's bigger. There's the big map. So these are the different regions for the CARD centers. That's our center there. We have a center at Tallahassee that covers the whole Panhandle, UF Gainesville, UF Jacksonville, UCF, FSU, FAU, did I say USF? USF, and University of Miami, which has a satellite in Nova. It's kind of weird. They're a private college, but whatever, they're in the group. So go ahead, click. Ours is the 7 counties around Orlando. And that's actually an old slide, but we currently have 20, I know, that was 8,300 was how many we had in Orange County. So 8,300 from Orange County. Most of the families are from Orange County because I guess that's where we are, even though nobody ever comes to our building. So go on next to the next one. There you go. Okay. So these are the diagnoses that we accept. So we can have anybody, like Camille said, if you have autism, if you have Down syndrome and autism, if you have CP and autism, if you're blind and have autism, if you have a genetic condition and you have autism, you can still register your card. We just are required by the legislature to have documentation of people's diagnosis that they actually meet criteria for our services. And then you can register. It's free. All the things that we do are free, with the exception of our conference, because we have to pay for the conference space. But our conference is 3 days long. It's here in Orlando because we're central. We're very lucky in that way. We usually have it at the Florida Mall Hotel, and it's $98 for the 3 days. And that's for the families and the educators. If you want to buy CEUs, you got to pay more money. But yeah, so those are our qualifying diagnoses. Go on to the next one. And these are the things that I think that make us as an agency a little bit, going back, a little bit unique. Perfect. So we take a holistic view. Your OT looks at the motor function, fine motor function, the speech pathologist looks at the speech, the behavior person looks at the behavior. We look at the whole child within the family, within the school, within the community, so that we're trying to take a longer view look, because sometimes they're not communicating with each other, and we can follow that child throughout their lifespan. So I've got a boy, young man, they're always boys to me, but I have one that I started working with him when he was 2, and he's now 28 years old. So I know what he's been through every step of his life. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, this IEP objective looks very familiar. I think we've had it for maybe 2 years already, so let's get rid of it. So it's things like that that we can do from having that long-term kind of view of the child. And then we're free, so that's nice. And because we're free, we don't need business in a way. You know, we have a lot of business right now, but we're not out there necessarily trying to drum up business for ourselves or for other companies. So we're pretty, we kind of like to vet with the families, how's this working for you? How is this company supporting you? Is it meeting your needs? And then we put together a resource guide based on what families tell us about different providers. So we kind of give an unbiased view of, nobody's paying us to be in our resource guide or anything like that. So we tell you the truth about what we think. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, so one of the things that I think we can do, which is nice because we have so many families, is if you want to find another family who has Down syndrome and autism, we've got 14 or 15, 20 of them, I think. And you're going to find one who has twins with autism, or twins, or, you know, any constellation, we have a way to try to connect you up to somebody else. You want to find somebody who's been to Pace Brantley, or you want to find somebody who's been to Morningstar. We can connect you up, so long as they, you know, we're not going to give somebody else's number out without their permission, but a lot of times parents want to help each other, so we have that ability. The other thing that we try to do is what we call disaster diffusion. So if a parent tells us, oh, you know, this is happening and my child hasn't had speech therapy for 2 months at school because the speech therapist is on leave, we could say, oh, go sue your school district, or we could call, and we'll call up to somebody up or in the district and say, hey, this school is not providing speech therapy, you need to go and give compensatory hours to this person. And a lot of times we can go through the back door and get that stuff done versus going through legal channels, or parents are just ignored, you know, so we know who to call above the principal. They don't like that at all. They don't like that. Yeah, we're a little rebels that way. And then, you know, we really support evidence-based practice, so we try to help families to, you know, with autism, I don't know if Down syndrome has this also, but with autism, every 2 years there's some new thing on the internet that you should be doing instead, and, you know, ABA doesn't work anymore because this and that, and, you know, so we kind of go through what does the real research say on these kinds of interventions that come up, and, you know, whether or not there is an evidence base for them. And then just the ability to go into a home, into a school, observe the child, bring information from home to school. This is how they do it at home, and it works great. Or this is how it goes at school, and it's working pretty good. Let's try it at home. So those are all kind of the unique assets that we have, where maybe it's not the same as you get in a speech language pathologist or somebody in the behavioral field. Maybe you're only doing clinic and they're not coming to your home. So, okay, let's go on. Oh yeah, this is just this is our 4 buckets that are in the legislation that created CARD. It's individualized family assistance, it's professional education, and we also do parent education. We have parent seminars on a whole bunch of different topics. We're having one next week on SSI. And then technical assistance, that be going out to where we're supporting people who are not just around the needs of one child, but a group of children. So a scout troop or a resort that's having a lot of kids with autism come. Special Olympics, we've developed a sensory room for Special Olympics and things like that. And then the last thing is public awareness, participating in screenings, getting the words out on the early signs of autism, things like this, and our statewide conference. So those are all the things that we have to fit all our activities into. All right, I think we're almost done. Yeah, so these are just, you know, examples of things that we do for the family, for the individualized services. So go on to the next one. This is our newsletter. We have that once a month. This is our Facebook page where we have a lot of information on things that are coming up. Go ahead. This is our website, and right there under Welcome to UCF CARD, that's the button that you can click to register. And then that's the easy way to register. You can also call the office and register. Our office, we're just not in the office. Who's in the office are our students, and we have 2 employees that are on the spectrum, and they won't answer the phone. No, we job card that part out. But we do have students that answer the phone, so if they're at the desk and they're not already on the phone, you can call in and do it, you take that way. If not, if they're on the phone, leave a message, and then somebody will call you back. If you don't leave a message, we can't call you back. And so then we have support groups. We have, I believe, 6 support groups. We have one for families of teens and tweens, one for soon-to-be adults and adults, one for parents of adults, that one's face-to-face. Most of the rest of them are online. We have one for Black families, we have one in Spanish, we have one for dads, and we have a group for adults. We have several groups for adults. So anywhere you fit in that range, you've got a potential at least 1 or 2 support groups. We also have one for parents of young kids or newly diagnosed kids. Let's go on to the next one. Yeah, so when you want us to go out to the school, we're not going there to be a spy on the teacher, which is exactly what the county thinks we're doing, but we're going there to look at, how's your child doing? Are there things we can tell the teacher that might help that child to be successful? So the goal is to make it work in that setting, not necessarily to move that child to a more restrictive setting. If that child could do better in a more inclusive setting, we are going to advocate for that, even though that's currently a bad word, but for the least restrictive environment, okay? Because that we know that kids with ASD, they can learn social skills from other kids who don't have ASD. Learning other social skills from kids who already have the same issues that you have is very hard. So we like to see them in general ed classes. And then the district gets to say what the policy is on visitation, how much time you have. And lately they send somebody sitting side by side with us, so we see the same thing that they're seeing. Okay, and then we work with Providing Autism Literacy Supports. This is a nonprofit for autism in our area, and they do some fundraising that helps us. Representative Susan Goldstein several years ago decided that she wanted to put into this legislation that CARD needs to raise 2% of its budget every year. And so we don't have a great way to do that. We don't want to say to our parents, hey, fundraise, because guess what, you're busy. So they do this fundraising for us, and then based on what funds they bring in, they offer outings and picnics and other things for the families, so that money goes back to the families. And then, these are just some of the summer programs. They have Camp Toucan, which is a camp where we've had children with Down syndrome and autism in the past, and that goes from like age 5 to age 24. It's a very small camp, but it's designed to support those kids who have a little bit more needs. And that, I think, is about it. Technical assistance, we talked about already. One more. Training, yep, we talked about that. And these are things we can't do. We can't give out money. We don't have a pot of money to give out. We can't do case management. A lot of people think we are case managers. We can't do that kind of contact where we're calling you every month and saying, how's it going? And let me help you fill out this form. We do advocate that parents register with the Agency for Persons with Disabilities every time. Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? We got a vocational rehabilitation. Did you do it? Did you do it? We can't make people do stuff, but we really want them to be plugged in early into any system that they can potentially take advantage of. We're not advocates. A lot of times people call us the CARD advocate. We sometimes maybe might tread on one side of that line, but I mean, our goal is to make it work in the current placement, or to advocate for what's best practices, what is legally required, but we're not legal authorities on anything educational. And we also don't do diagnosis or medical advice. So the goal was to create opportunities in the communities and not to supplant the community or the schools, and so that's what we try to do. Okay, so no emergency response team, call 911. And this is all, we basically ask that people return their diagnostic stuff when they register, so we can get services started. Keep their information up to date, because sometimes they drop off the face of the earth and then we don't have a way to contact them to say, hey, guess what? We have a car that you, a community car. And sometimes things happen. We had one time where this company 2 days before this event, they said, we'd like to do an event for people with autism, and we're giving away 105 bikes at the end of the event. And so we just put that up on Facebook, and people who were on the Facebook, who had followed the Facebook, got to see it, and the people who didn't, we can't call them all. So just keep in contact, come to the trainings, and do the little steps, the action steps that the ASD specialist recommends. And we have our ASD specialists placed out in the community. They don't come to UCF but once a month, because I make them come for like a team meeting. But we have 1 in Brevard, 2 in Volusia, 2 in Lake Sumter, 2 in Osceola, 7 in Orlando, 3 in Seminole. I think that was all of them. So they're in the communities where they live, kind of serving the people. So they get to know that community pretty well. They get to know the resources there. But just keep us informed of what's going on with your child. If your child's sick, don't tell us to come see him at school or home, please. And then just realize that we have a lot of problem because our services are free. So we make an appointment and we're sitting there waiting for that person to come, and they don't come. That's somebody else's time you just stole. Somebody else who's sitting and waiting to get the next time. So just to be really conscientious consumers and not to waste the resources. And I think that's it. Yes, it is. Do you guys have any questions?